I know for Douglas, this really began with his daughter, Cheri, who was born with a number of disabilities, I believe, including cerebral palsy, if I'm not mistaken. She wasn't expected to live. After a certain period of time, they suggested, the hospital and the medical experts suggested that she should be institutionalized. And it was obviously a devastating decision for Douglas and his wife.
Cheri was a severely disabled young lady in the sense of crippled and not able to articulate and had to be cared for 24/7. She could only communicate in very basic ways. She wasn't able to speak. She wasn't able to really say words. She could make her feelings known for sure, but it was very rudimentary and certainly not in any spoken form.
The image of a child that had overwhelming challenges was in front of me, and I can still see her looking up at me with her mouth open and just going, ah, and I would say that and she would mimic me.
As I said, she was, certainly retarded from that sense of the word in terms of being able to speak and to move and so forth. She had to be carried in their arms at all times in terms of moving her around. And it was a huge job. It was a huge, huge, huge job. I was always amazed at the love and compassion they showed. And so even though from a medical perspective, I think Doug was not happy with the specialists that he saw, so we tried to go a different route. We were both aware of the Edgar Cayce readings and Edgar Cayce's philosophy, and that made for a little common bond that we had, and so we tried to follow those readings and to do those things that he had advised. My knowledge of Edgar Cayce came about through my reading of various types of medical therapy, and some of it being non-mainstream for sure. And anyway, he was a photographer in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and as he became an adult, he found that he was able to put himself into a trance, and doing so could answer questions while he was in that state as to people's health and treatments for their problems. And it became, over the years, compiled a huge amount of information in terms of various things that, various therapies that he was able to advise people to do.
At some point, he sought out counsel from another one of these sleeping prophets, Ross Peterson, who, like Edgar Cayce, had the ability to make remote medical diagnoses and put himself in a deep meditative state, like Cayce did, who did thousands and thousands of readings in this state.
I was downstairs in the workshop at the time, and I felt an urge to go upstairs and turn on my television set. Without changing the channel, there was a man laying on a couch doing a deep trance meditation reading. I said to my wife, "We have to meet that man." Well, not too long thereafter, I had my very first psychic reading ever in my life with Ross Peterson. Ross Peterson went into a state of relaxation and he began the reading. I was absolutely amazed. We didn't give anything away, and he was extremely accurate with Cheri's health condition and what could be done for her.
And Ross Peterson was utilizing that technique, able to direct Douglas to see the right people and isolate what was the problem, and it culminated in Cheri coming out of that institution and spending the rest of her days at home.
Don did the chiropractic treatments and tried to gently manipulate, at least that was my interpretation of the spine and so forth.
When Cheri first came to me and we saw her for the first time, she was a wee bit of a thing. Didn't weigh very many pounds, certainly maybe 20 pounds, and was pretty much in a vegetative state. She was very toxic, had a lot of medication, to such an extent I think it affected her teeth. Dilantin, anticonvulsant drugs she'd had, phenobarbital. Ross had told me about the toxicity that was in her body as well, and it was certainly true. We started to work with her, and her pressure in her neck was not good. I could feel that her neck was out of alignment, and that's a very important thing to realign when the upper part of the neck is out of alignment. And because of the energy that comes from the brain and goes down through to the rest of the body, and if it's blocked in any way, even a minor amount can produce things like convulsions, epileptic seizures, and she'd had some of those, I understand, as I recall. And so part of the problem was to get her off the medication. Her bowels were poor, and there was blockage down in the lower part of her back, and we worked with that part of her back as well, where the nerve supply to the bowels is. And I had to enlist the help of one of my friends who worked with me at the Toronto Society for Psychical Research, with Alan Spraggett, and Stephen Mita was his name, medical practitioner, and we became friends there, and he helped me get Cheri off some of the drugs and medications. I'm a drugless practitioner and can't prescribe or take people off medication. I can only suggest certain things, and he was able to assist me in getting Cheri off the medication, and I think that's one of the reasons why she would convulse and have problems, was because of that toxicity.
Well, she was, obviously the Dilantin was because she was having seizures, and of course the only way that anybody sort of knew how to control seizures was the use of Dilantin, which is a drug that's been around for a long time. And the other drug that, because of all her spasticity in her muscles, used the Vivol to relax the muscles somewhat. So that would make her more comfortable, and she wouldn't be so clutching in terms of her spasms in her arms and in her legs. And it would help relieve I'm sure it was painful for her, and I'm sure that it was not an easy thing for them to watch. What we tried to do was to gradually taper the medications down until we got to the point that we could actually stop them. And I think maybe through Dr. Vigiani and the massages that the family used to do, I think that perhaps really did make a difference in terms of also helping to stop the seizure.
I was just amazed at the ability of this man to take this information that he gleaned from wherever, and he conveyed that to me, so I just followed instructions, and I let my inner intelligence just allowed me to move on with Cheri and do what I needed to do, and it was very much an intuitive thing in large measure, plus the skills that I had gleaned over the years. I graduated from the chiropractic college, taught there, the one in Toronto, and postgraduate studies in Davenport, Iowa, the Palmer College. I studied also with a lady who was a master at the upper cervical technique. Her name was Dr. Vera Littlejohn, and she taught me a lot about difficult cases. And so difficult cases were not new to me.
Doug also was interested in perhaps trying to do something akin to what Mr. Casey would do. And so I was kind of interested in that approach. And so we started out, and I would have him come to the office for an hour one afternoon. And at that time I had a reclining chair in my office. And so we'd lay him back on the chair, and I'd have 4 or 5 charts of people of whom he had no knowledge, of course. And we would try to get him to answer questions, or I would ask him questions, I should say, and he would try to provide me with answers to these, in regards to these people's health. We had I think we improved as we went along. I think Doug actually became, as he had learned to be able to get himself into a state where he was able to visualize these people and to visualize their health issues, was able to provide some information. And I think as time went on, he improved in that. And even though we lost contact after several years, when he moved away, I never sort of fully lost contact with him, and know that he continued to do this as part of his life's work.
So that really, I believe, was the genesis for Douglas to immerse himself in this whole world and familiarize himself with not only Edgar Casey, but the work of Ross Peterson. And then he trained under Ross Peterson and researched it, and then developed his own skills until he is now perhaps the last of the sleeping prophets who utilizes the same techniques as the great Edgar Casey.